Frank here with the National Real Estate Post. Before I hand you off to this very interesting interview with David Stevens and Brian Stevens, I want to remind the loan originators out there that if you feel you're in need of developing relationships with real estate agents, Listing Booster has you covered. That's what we do. That's what we're best at. We'll help you get the relationship, maintain a relationship, and then pull referrals from that relationship. That's what we've always been all about. There's a webinar tomorrow. If you want to check it out, click the banner you see on your screen right here, right below the video, or it's over on the right too, but right below the video, see this image right below, click it, register for that webinar Wednesday, and we'll show you how to get the job done. Now with that, let's get to David Stevens and Brian Stevens for this very interesting interview on the new QM rule. Very important for all originators. See it.
Hey guys, Brian Stevens here. I got Dave Stevens, and we're going to go over a couple of things that I think is causing a lot of confusion right now in the mortgage space. It just came out, and I think a lot of you saw the article. It said the GSEs won't buy qualified mortgage loans under GSE patch after July 1st. Dave, can you talk about that for a little bit?
Yeah, so let me try to make this as easy to understand as possible. So the CFPB under Kathy Kraninger, before she exited and the new administration came in, they published a final QM rule. The rule says that if you're 150, the rule places the old rule, the Appendix Q and 43 DTI, with a new rule that says if you're 150 basis points or less over APOR, that's considered QM safe harbor. If you're 225 basis points over APOR, that's the rebuttable presumption ceiling, at which point after that it's non-QM. And so that rule came out, and when the Bureau switched hands and the new administration came in, the acting director then put a hold on the implementation of the final rule, even though it had already been made final, in order to give a chance to review it. Now we can go down that path because there's a lot of potential risk there, but nevertheless, that rule was put in place. So in January, while the old administration was still in office, before the Biden administration took office, Director Calabria of the FHFA and Secretary Mnuchin of the Treasury Department, along with each GSE, which included their CEOs and their boards of directors, ratified an amendment to the preferred stock purchase agreement. And that ratification was on January 14th. And it covered a lot of things. It covered the new capital rule. It covered mission-driven objectives. It put a limit on multifamily purchases, all sorts of stuff. But two things that were hidden in the rule itself were two key pieces that affect us, one of which was a limit on second homes or investment properties to no more than 7% of total sales in a 52-week period, rolling week period. So in any 52-week period, you can't exceed 7% of loans securitized by Fannie or Freddie. That's one. But the other provision that relates to QM said that on or after July 1st of 2021, the patch will no longer exist, and the GSEs will mandate that all lenders comply with the new QM rule, but not any QM rule. It specifically referenced the QM reg code of the rule as established during Kathy Kraninger's regime that set the 150 basis points over APOR. Regardless of whether the Bureau is revisiting the rule, and looking at it, and even if they even revise it, the contract for the GSEs says you can't sell me anything more than 150 basis points over APOR. So two things. One is the Bureau has said, we're wide open. You can use the old rule, you can use the new rule for now, the 150 basis points, or you can use the patch. We consider any of those to be QM acceptable. But it doesn't matter because Fannie and Freddie won't buy them. Fannie and Freddie are saying, as of July 1, we will only buy loans that meet the 150 basis points over APOR as safe harbor up to, and then the 225 maximum for rebuttable presumption, QM eligible loans. Actually, the GSEs won't buy anything more than the 150 basis points, only safe harbor agency business based on that QM rule. So the confusion here is, and it was interesting, by the way, the FHFA was sort of smart in that they knew that anybody can tinker with the rule over time. So when they wrote the amendment in January, they codified which rule they're going to comply with and required their sellers to comply with. And so they codified that rule. What has sort of messed this all up is the Bureau has said, we're not sure we're going to keep that rule. And so what we don't know is what's going to happen here. There's a risk that the Bureau, and there's some folks in the Bureau in the new regime, one of whom in particular I met with back during the Rich Cordray period, and she's back in there. She doesn't think there should be a safe harbor. And to the degree that the new regime has influence, we don't know what's going to happen with the QM rule. Our hope is, and industry's hope is, they're going to review the rule that was published. They're actually going to see the GSEs are already down the pike on this one. And hopefully they'll just adopt the rule that was written by Kathy, and suddenly we'll be all in alignment. We'll have a QM rule at the Bureau that matches the QM rule that GSEs are complying to, requiring lenders to comply with, and we'll no longer have all these separate underwriting standards all over the market. But it's not 100% certain. The Bureau could dump the rule. They could technically actually issue their own new final rule. They don't have to go through advance notice of proposed rulemaking again, because they already did that. And they already have their notice and comment. The comments are received. And since they just delayed the implementation of the previous final rule, it hadn't gotten implemented in time for the regime change, they can just simply implement a new final rule, which puts a lot of risk on the market. And I'm hoping that the new Bureau that Raj as the director and the team there won't be as radical in their move, in making a move like that. Our hope is that they'll at least comply and release that proposed rule as it was written as final, the final rule as was written by Kraninger, and make it final after the delay of this implementation. So yes, the Bureau is saying you can do any of these three and it's QM eligible, but if you're going to sell a Freddie Fannie are very clear. Their policy says you got to meet the 150 over APOR, and there's direction that they've sent out in seller letters as of this week. The folks like the MBA and others are pressing on Calabria and the FHFA to work with Treasury to change that language, frankly, and keep the patch in place for a period of time. They're also trying to get Calabria to work with Treasury on the investor property and second home limitation. But unfortunately, as I understand it, Mark in his role is not communicating with the Treasury Department as much as he did back in the day when they were all on the same team, as it were. And not to mention the Treasury Department is overwhelmed staff-wise. And so for them to go back and retinker with this preferred stock purchase amendment that was made in January and make a modification to it to give it more flexibility, that would be a problem. So that's where we are in the QM rule. I haven't gone completely into the investor property second home thing, but I'll stop there for a second.
Okay, and so just real quickly, everybody, I'm looking right now. The APOR today is 2.76. You add, 1.5 to that, you're going to be at 4.25. So there seems to be quite a bit of wiggle room with that. 150 basis points over the APOR. So that should encompass most loans right now. My question is, with the two other options that are on the table where Fannie and Freddie aren't going to purchase those loans, is it are they basically dead in the water then? So the mortgage patch is dead in the water?
Yeah, I mean, I think folks that do, well, first of all, I don't know why anybody would keep the 43 DTI Appendix Q version simply because it's tighter than the 150 over APOR and far more complicated. So, but maybe there's some nuance of flexibility in the Appendix Q that some non-QM, non-agency guys might be, who are introducing new product to market, might be able to play in. I don't think there is.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I want to read this to you from the Treasury and just get your take on this. This is what we're talking about. This is from the January 14th meeting with
letter.
The Treasury and Mark Calabria and the FHFA, I believe it was. The GSEs will limit the acquisition of single-family mortgage loans secured by second homes and investment properties to 7% of single-family acquisitions aligned with the current levels over the preceding 52-week period. And you said that's rolling. Here's my question: what happens if what happens if the market is hot for that and it goes above the 7%? They just won't buy them. What happens with those loans?
Yeah, they won't buy them, and it's an impossible rule, one of the things that folks who work in our space inside the Beltway, all of us housing advocates, are trying to press on the FHFA to go back to Treasury and rewrite that portion. And look, here's the bottom line. Nobody can manage to a 7% mix limit. And that's why, you're seeing investors already, people, correspondent lenders and more, just put fee overlays on their investors and second homes because they're going to try to control the flow. But even that's not a precise game, right? Some added 150 bips in the beginning, some added 200 bips, just to kind of slow the volume, price it up enough that if you exceed the 7% limit, maybe you can go find a private markets buyer that would buy those because it would be a rich yield on it. Our view and the industry's view, and I'm sure this is the MBA view, is that that's not the way to write the rule. If you want to slow second homes and investor properties, just price it. And put a higher price on it, 150, 200. If you want to do it, go ahead and do it. That'll slow the volume down and make it more expensive and maybe open up a private market, which is clearly what Director Calabria wants to do. And by the way, gang, I've read Mark's personal testimonies to Congress going back to when the GSEs first went into conservatorship and his roles at the Cato Institute, primarily when he was there. And he testified in 10, 11, 12, long before he became the FHFA director. And he was very clear on what needs to happen with the GSEs. He explicitly testified that their footprint should be shrunk, that give the ability for private capital to come in. And he said the way to shrink the footprints is to raise pricing, get out of second homes, get out of cash out refis, all these steps that he's already in the process of doing. And, the 50 bip add-on for cash out refis is intentional. It's not just it's a way to make money and build more capital for the GSEs. It's also a way for him to begin slowing refi volume that the GSEs are doing. And likewise, every step he's doing here on the second home and investor property is also just right according to the game plan that he laid out himself out of his own mouth in multiple testimonies going back years. So no one should be surprised by this, but the way they wrote the policy, it's impossible to manage and it's driving the industry crazy. And all the majors, both non-bank and bank that do investor loans and second homes, they're either looking to pull them out completely off the shelves, or they're trying to figure out how to manage to these mixed limits, and they're trying to do it with price. If any of you are members of the Mortgage Action Alliance, which is the MBA's way of reaching out to loan origination folks. By the way, you don't have to be a member. I'm not making a pitch for it. I don't work for the MBA anymore, but it's free to join. And they're going to put out a call to action, as I understand it, here fairly soon, in order to try to get all of industry to respond to the Treasury Department in an automated way. It's really easy through the MA app on your phone or tablet or whatever you use, and try to get the industry en masse to go and scream and yell from the highest rooftops that the 7% cap is absurd. It's impossible to manage to. A rolling 52 week makes it even tougher. And it could really collapse the market. And frankly, as we all know, there really aren't other market players in this. Maybe Redwood or whoever can create a market that's interesting to investors at these higher yields. That's possible, but it isn't there now. And what you all may not be aware of, some of you who do a lot of this some of you are aware, but the percentage of investor loans and second homes had actually risen pretty precipitously over the last year. It's now up to about 14% of total market, or was. That's a lot of business. And so, it's unfortunate that both of these things weren't understood clearly. They were in the preferred stock purchase agreement amendment that was made public in January. Those were issued to the public. So when the policy change came out from Freddie and Fannie saying, hey guys, as of July 1, you can't sell me more than 7%. And likewise, as of July 1, you've got to follow the QM standard at 150 basis points over APOR. That came out first, and then the investor one. But people started, freaking out around the country. In reality, it was already there in print for quite a while. And unfortunately, we just didn't read the nuance of that amendment.
It seems that there's lacking a certain level of logic here. If you're going to limit it to 7%, that it's a moving target, and lenders are going to always fund and underwrite to the most conservative standards because they don't want to get stuck with these loans. So that 7% is always a moving target. It seems to me that if you don't like they don't like underwriting or pricing over at the FHFA, because wouldn't it all come down to pricing and underwriting? I mean, like you said, add 150 basis points on a little price adjustment and maybe change what some of the guidelines are, make it a little bit more strict so they're safer. When they say 7%, it tells me that we believe this loan at this price to be inherently risky. Therefore, we want to limit our risk exposure to these type of loans to 7% or less at any given time.
Yeah, and I actually think it's a little bit different. I think if you read Mark's writings going back over the past decade, it's more about the philosophy of what a government guaranteed entity in the mortgage space should be. And we all talked about this before, but Mark has stated publicly over and over again that we don't need government guaranteed government-backed mortgage providers in the secondary market, that the private market could pick this all up. Now, I disagree with that, and I think it's foolish, but he firmly believes it. He believes that the size and scope of the GSEs is crowding out private capital, and he certainly believes that if they're going to be in the space, their mission should be single-family purchase transactions to help buyers buy homes, and they shouldn't be in the business of doing second homes and vacation homes and refinancing and all this other stuff, and let the private sector take that. And I think this is more true to his philosophical libertarian philosophy on how to shrink the footprint of Fannie and Freddie. To your point on the 7% cap, frankly, I think lenders could manage the 7% cap if it didn't. It'd be tough, but if it didn't come with the 52 rolling week rolling week average, there are pool limitations right now that the GSEs have. For example, high BAL, conventional eligible fixed rate loans that are Fannie Freddie saleable have 10% pool stip limits. So you can't have more than 10% of high BAL in a pool. And fortunately, there's been a healthy enough jumbo whole loan market in the bank portfolios and elsewhere that originators were able to sell whole loan to Wells Fargo correspondent division, for example. Wells would then put some into GSE securities and hold some on balance sheet, and they were able to manage that. But that was month by month. It wasn't a 52-week average. I don't know how you do a 52-week average. What if you fill it all up in the first,
right?
And then you're done. We're out of the investor property business. It's a crazy process. So, I will just say, folks in housing policy right now are on overload, working all these issues. A lot of it is, the surprise language in the most recent amendment to the PSPA that Mnuchin and Calabria did in January caught some people by surprise. So that's one element to it. The way it was written is confounding the problem because it's that 52-week rolling average and the stip on the 7%, when frankly, the recommendation by all of us in housing policy is just price it, man. If you don't want it, give it a price. It'll slow the volume down naturally and make room for private capital to come in. And you can test those boundaries as a regulator. But this is just a very challenging time. And then to make this more complicated, unfortunately, I just don't think that Mark, in his role at the CFPB, has yet established an open dialogue with the new regime at Treasury. And that only makes it harder because he had a very open dialogue with Mnuchin and all the guys there, some of whom are still there. But there's some new folks coming in with the Treasury Department. And Janet Yellen's team probably isn't conversing directly with Mark a lot. And so certainly as I hear it, he hasn't reached out to Treasury to try to amend that 7% clause to come up with another solution that's more workable for the industry. So in the meantime, as usual, as we've seen with all through this pandemic, where we got caught holding the bag on no support for servicing, when you had to go do the forbearance program, and we got hit with the 6-point hit if you sell first payment defaults in the forbearance plan, and refis suddenly stopped overnight. All of this stuff has just been a series of challenges along the way. This one is fixable, but the only way you fix it, Calabria can't do it by his own caveat. He has to work with Treasury. The PSPA is a contractual agreement that is actually between the Treasury Department and the two GSEs with the FHFA approving and the boards of directors of the GSE. So it's not, something you can just quickly change overnight.
Okay, I want to read, if you got a couple seconds, I want to read two more things
Yeah.
to your opinion on them. Oh, by the way, guys, just when we're talking about the January 14th, 2021 amendment to the PSPA, that was 6 days before the Biden administration took over. So This is kind of like pulling the pin on the grenade and chucking it over your shoulder on the way out the door. It kind of feels like that a little bit to me.
By the way, if I could just say, one of the unique elements of this director is he has caught the industry by surprise on multiple occasions. And I will just tell you, I worked with Ed DeMarco, who was the Bush appointee as acting director. Ed and I we literally would have breakfast about once a month at Ebbitt's Grill in DC and just talk about stuff that's going on. And he'd let me know, and I'd get the phone call, Dave, I just want to let you know, blah, blah, blah. Rich Cordray did the same. Mel Watt and his team did the same. Surprising the industry. I don't know why you do it, but these elements in this PSPA amendment clearly caught the industry by surprise. And I just find that it's just bad behavior, unfortunately.
Mel Watt looks like Lando Calrissian from Empire Strikes Back, but that's another story for another day. Here's what I want to read you. It's from the 2014 Treasury FHFA amendment. The GSEs will limit the acquisition of single-family mortgage loans with multiple high-risk characteristics at their current levels. A maximum of 6% of purchase money mortgages, a maximum of 3% of refinance mortgages over the trailing 52-week period can have 2 or more high-risk characteristics at origination. Combined loan to value, LTV greater than 90%, debt to income ratios greater than 45%, and FICO equivalent scores less than 680. What they're throwing back into this thing is it's a 52-week rolling average. How is a lender going to, understand if they're going to have a sellable loan or not have one? Is it the same type of thing, or am I reading too much into this?
No, you're reading it right. I mean, that's what complicates all of this is the 52-week rolling average. I mean, any originator could implement in their system, or Empower can, or whatever system people are using. Not Empowered. What's Ellie Mae's platform? But anyway, you could implement the rules of underwriting, FICO limitations, et cetera, and automatically get these loans through the system. It's the 52-week rolling average that gets you in deep trouble because you're going to have to monitor all of your flow activity to the GSEs. And if you've passed a threshold, you're either going to have to temporarily pause originating these loans,
right,
or change your guidelines significantly. And I can be certain that there's a frantic search, maybe not frantic, but there's a search for private market investors who might buy this stuff. So it's a challenge. And I'm sure some portfolios, bank portfolios, for example, would they be interested in high quality second home, single families to hold on balance sheet like they've been holding jumbos? Probably. Investor properties gets a little more challenging. So we'll have to see how this all washes out. And the two questions are, one, will industry be able to motivate Treasury to step up and reach out to Calabria and modify that clause of the document you're reading so that it at minimum releases the 52-week rolling average, preferably for all of us would be just eliminate the whole thing and replace it with a price hit. Because that's the easiest thing to put out on it to get into the market. But we're waiting to see if that happens. And then second, we're all going to have to be waiting to see if there are private investors either in the REIT space or the PLS market or bank portfolios that may step in and have an appetite to buy some of this stuff. It's funny with all of this, the Ginnie programs were explicitly exempted from everything related to Dodd-Frank, and obviously FHFA has no authority over them. So the FHA, VA, USDA programs on the QM rule, they don't have to comply with any of that. They are not subject to the QM rule, and that was legislated, so it's law. No regulator can step in and change their mind without going back and creating a new law. So it's an interesting dynamic that we'll have to also see what happens in this QM space and whether that suddenly by default kicks more volume over to FHA should the CFPB go in a different direction. So you got two big deals going on with this little January letter. One is the investor second home limit, and the other is the outcome we're all seeing now that as of July 1, you can't sell to Fannie and Freddie anything that's above 150 over APOR. So interesting.
Immediately with where rates are, I think that one's they're not gonna feel that one too bad right now. But the second half of the year is gonna be interesting though, isn't it? Because if this came out on January 14th and you have a 7% rolling average, you would figure you're gonna get closer to that 7% rolling average as you get closer to its January 14th renewal date. I mean, for lenders out there, think of your USDA. Near the end of the funding cycle, it's like, okay, we ran out of money. We got to wait for 3 months before we can do this sucker again.
No, that's right.
It could potentially go the route of what we're seeing with USDA, but this one seems so unbelievably avoidable. So what I think I'm hearing you say is that Mark Calabria is really putting his overall philosophies about what he believes should be the identity of the GSEs going forward above what actual market realities are.
Yeah, I mean, I will tell you in all true disclosure, when I was still at the MBA before leaving, I met with officials of the Trump administration, both at Treasury and the FHFA. And there were many inside the administration who felt that the GSE shouldn't be in the cash out refi business. I had a dinner with a very senior official, and I had many CEOs from our industry who were members of the MBA at that same dinner, where that official went on about shrinking the footprint, getting out of cash out refis, investor properties, second homes. I mean, literally said it. Now, Mark, the reason why I think he's doing this is philosophical to him is he's said it. He has multiple testimony on this subject. In fact, Andrew Ackerman, a writer with the Wall Street Journal, published an article about this last week and referenced the testimony. So this is just what we're dealing with right now. It's just nothing's ever stays the same in our mortgage industry, and we're having to deal with this now. One thing back on that QM rule, I know it shouldn't be an impact. In fact, the 150 basis points over APOR was advocated by most of the mortgage trade groups inside the Beltway as a good outcome. So that's a good thing that they're adopting it. What'll be interesting is if the CFPB changes their final rule and doesn't adopt this one, what will Calabria do if he's still there with the GSEs? Because the Bureau is going to say if they're still allowing the patch under the patch extension, and as long as they have it there, along with it doesn't really matter what Fannie Freddie say that they're going to require because the patch covers it all. So as long as the Bureau accepts the patch, who cares what the rule says if you're selling Fannie and Freddie loans? But Calabria just rewrote what you can underwrite for Fannie Freddie by saying you have to adopt to the most recent QM rule. So this is just, I don't know if you're following me on that trend line, but
I think so.
It's complicated. And we just got to watch what both entities do, because there's a bit of a chess game going here. And unfortunately, I think the philosophical differences are pretty extraordinary as long as Mark remains in his current job. So, and I only say it because his time may run out when we get the results of the Collins case, Collins versus Mnuchin, that the Supreme Court heard last November, which we expect that the Supreme Court to rule on that publicly sometime, but no later than June is what most people are expecting from a timeline standpoint. If they rule that single directorship is unconstitutional, then Calabria will go the way of Kathy Kraninger at the CFPB and exit the building, and they'll put a new person in place. The rest of the regime that is in the CFPB, the other regulator, is in for a 5-year term, if there's a change in presidency after the Biden term to any other president, it's possible that the director who's just got in, Raj, could be terminated. But that chess game will continue as we all continue to work through the politics of should the government be backing home loans or should they not? And what you're seeing out of this PSPA amendment is the philosophy from an administration that included a Treasury Secretary and the FHFA director that says, yeah, I mean, these guys can back some loans, but they shouldn't be backing all these loans. And that's what that says.
It's kind of funny. It's like, well, are you are you conservative or are you liberal? It's like, how about just a little continuity?
Yes,
exactly. Just a little continuity. I don't care what it is, a little continuity. I asked you this before. I want to rephrase it a little bit differently. We spoke a few moments ago about some of the language that the CFPB is using when it's directing towards servicers. Language that I refer to as being hyperbolic, over the top, tidal wave of foreclosures. You need to have us. You don't need to fear us if you do the right thing, but if you don't, we're coming after you. On top of that, Brian Montgomery, I heard him talk about don't look for any cuts in FHA mortgage insurance, even though their congressional mandate is sitting at over 3 times what it needs to be. FHA looks to be sitting on a mountain of money right now, them over there at HUD, but they're not going to do anything to move that savings on to people who are purchasing with FHA going forward. All of this screams to me that the CFPB and HUD through the FHA is truly concerned about a wave of foreclosures coming the second half of 2021 or 2022. And that's part of the reason why we keep kicking the can down the road when it comes to forbearance periods. Is that true, or am I again reading too much?
Well, you're unpacking a lot of stuff here, but let me do. I think you're right, and there's a lot of discussion going on, and I've been in meetings. I sit on a group that the Urban Institute has a regular call with a group of housing folks on this subject. The problem with the forbearance plan was the voluntary aspect of it. Remember, we talked about that from the very beginning. Anybody can take it for any reason. And there's going to be a whole bunch of borrowers. Now, if we add 6 months to this, there's going to be a whole bunch of borrowers who haven't made payments on their mortgage for well over a year. And so don't take a coastal high-end market, but take a standard middle America market, take a $300,000 home. You haven't made payments on your home for a year, maybe a year and a half by the time this is all done. And you now have, you can stay in your home, but you now have to repay 18 months worth of payments. So a lot of people say, one of the arguments has been, and I believe this way as well, before this thing got extended again, was that home prices have gone up. There's not real inventory on the market. People are going to want to keep their homes. But there may be some who say, that's a big mountain of cash I'm going to owe at the end. Maybe I just give the keys back. And no one knows what's going to happen. The challenge in the FHA portfolio is we have borrowers who got into their homes with 3% down. 40% of FHA loans last year, according to the report to Congress, had no down payment. They had down payment assistance. And maybe a lot of them just volunteered and say, hey man, free hall pass. I don't have to pay my mortgage. I'm opting in. And we all know how easy that was. I called a servicer a couple months ago to get the exact payoff number because their website wasn't working. And I was worried they were going to stick me in forbearance and I didn't want it. But it just tells you how many people are in. FHA, as we all know, their serious delinquency rate is up around 14 or 15% right now. And that's across all loans. If you look at some of the higher balance loans, it's even higher. Their serious delinquency rate is skewed based to the higher BAL loans. And so the point being, what Secretary Fudge and the team at HUD, I'm sure, are looking at is, would they like to lower MIPs? I think they would. And I think that was their intention all along. I think it still is. The secretary said not for now. That's what she said when asked about lowering mortgage insurance premiums. And it's because they need to wait and find out, of this 15%, what percentage will be reperformers, and how many of these loans are going to come back and turn out to be reperforming mortgages. And they don't know that. And if considering that that's the highest stressed single family portfolio of all the government guaranteed programs, right? Because it's high loan to value, tends to be lower FICO score, and a lot of first time home buyers who don't have experience owning a home. So all of this combined gives you pause as a regulator, I think, at HUD. And I haven't been there myself, I've been the FHA commissioner. It's what I would be doing probably is taking pause. So Brian's piece basically states that I mean, look, Brian's a good friend and has been a friend for years. We disagree on a lot of things. Brian was on a board of directors of a mortgage insurance company. And certainly the MI companies like the fact that the premiums aren't coming down. I think the secretary, once we get through this slog and they understand what the real ultimate impact is to the mutual mortgage insurance fund as a result of the whatever foreclosures ultimately happen or don't happen, they'll be able to assess the impact to the fund, assuming the fund remains as healthy as it is, or even a little less healthy than it is now. It could certainly take a punch and a fee cut. Then I think we'll see opportunity for fee reductions. And they have all sorts of ways they could do that. But I think that this regime will drop fees. And the last thing I would just say, Brian, is, I know people are a little freaking out because rates are up and refis are down. But, our industry has just come off a ridiculous year plus where we made billionaires out of a whole bunch of non-bank mortgage CEOs.
Yes, we did.
And loan originators made record incomes. I don't think, a rate drop right now, if you're a policymaker, is like, it's not urgent. Rates are still really good. And I could keep my powder dry, as it were, until it's needed more, maybe closer to a midterm election or even the next presidential election. So sometime in this 4-year period, I expect premiums to drop, but we need to see the outcome. So that's where you're at.
Not anytime soon. So we still have our adverse market fee. We had talked about this before. We're probably going to see a jump in the G fee, and don't expect any relief over at FHA. And again, the reason I brought it up is Brian Montgomery had said, he goes, I'm paraphrasing, we don't have quite as much money as we would need to have if we were to face something in line with what happened in 2008, 9, and 10. Right. So it tells me that that's kind of what they're thinking.
Yeah. And the difference is between 2008, 9, 10 gang is, this is a long call, so we should cut this off. But the biggest thing about 2008, 9, 10 was home prices literally dropped 20% from peak to trough. And so people were in negative equity and we had severe job loss, and it was a really bad credit crisis that took down the economy. And that's what caused all of these foreclosures and ultimate defaults and costs to the FHA program. This time it's different. The economy was actually pretty resilient through this whole crisis, but we had this forbearance plan that allowed anybody in, whether they needed it or not. I'm hoping that most people actually needed it, but there's a lot who didn't. The numbers were big, not as big as some thought, but nevertheless, it's now gone on for a long period of time where people haven't made mortgage payments. So they may not have negative equity from home price declines, but the pile of cash they now owe due to forbeared parent payments is in a sense similar to creating negative equity. It's like your own neg am loan, courtesy of a pandemic and a piece of legislation. So this is the challenge, and what forecasters aren't completely certain of, and everybody may have opinions, but economists and those that are forecasting what's going to happen forward here is how many of these people are actually going to reperform. And some think the number is going to be really high. Others are a little bit more tempered in their view and have some concerns that we may see ultimately higher foreclosure rates than we expected. And that's where we got to work, flesh through the system here.
Well, we will see. By the way, according to the Joint Economic Committee of Congress, the average foreclosure in 2008 cost $77,935. I'm sure it's higher now, which means we could eat through a lot of that equity if we do see a wave of foreclosures. Dave, hey, listen, thanks for giving me all the time today. Just real quickly, did you get your vaccine?
I did. I got both vaccines.
You got both vaccines?
No side effects. No side effects. Pfizer. No side effects. It was perfect.
Yep. I let Bill Gates put a microchip in me too. So I'm all.
Yes, of course.
I got my J&J over here. I'm ready to roll. Dave, thank you.
All right, dude.
I appreciate everything. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Take care.